Welcome to the Healthy Heart Show, where we pull back the curtain on conventional medicine and dive into the root causes of cardiovascular health. If you are concerned about high cholesterol, high blood pressure, heart attacks, stroke, or atrial fibrillation, this is the place for you. We will provide natural heart information that will help you prevent, treat, and reverse any ailment, leaving pills and procedures out of the picture. Here are your guides to holistic heart health, board-certified cardiologist and Amazon best-selling author, Dr. Jack Wolfson, and natural heart doctor, naturopathic physician, Dr. Lauren Latanza.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. Dr. Jack Wolfson, board-certified cardiologist. We are broadcasting live on the Natural Heart Doctor Facebook group and on our YouTube channel as well. So welcome. Jump on in. Ask questions. I've got a phenomenal guest with you today. This is Dr. Bill Schindler. I'll tell you about him. But first of all, let me say hello. Dr. Bill, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
I am doing wonderful, and let me just get it right out there, man. Listen, I love your new book. I love the swag you're wearing today. Eat Like a Human, and we're going to dive into the book. You got the endorsement by Mark Hyman on the front, and of course some phenomenal practitioners and authorities on the back. Let me kind of give a little intro to Dr. Bill Schindler, an internationally known archaeologist, primitive technologist, and chef. He is the founder and director of the Eastern Shore Food Lab, with a mission to preserve and revive ancestral dietary approaches to create a nourishing, ethical, and sustainable food system. He's an adjunct professor of archaeology at University College in Dublin. Dr. Bill, you're kind of one of those guys who I point to whenever I get off on these paleo rants and why we should be eating this way. I'm like, if you don't want to trust me, trust the PhD, Dr. Bill Schindler.
Well, thank you. Let me tell you what, this approach to food has literally transformed mine and my family's life, and anybody that we have as students or customers here at the Modern Stone Age Kitchen. It really is the right way to look at these things. And, it's weird me coming at this. It may seem weird for a lot of people coming at this from an archaeological perspective, but it is exactly the right place to come from. We are living in 300,000-year-old bodies. We're literally living in Stone Age bodies with essentially the same dietary needs and requirements. And we're faced with this weird modern food system that we're trying to get our nutrition from. So it's a great perspective, and I'm happy to talk about it.
Yeah, let's dive into it. As far as how long have humans and our kind of, if we're Homo sapiens, mm-hmm. and we've got predecessors, maybe 15, 20 different maybe species that we've kind of evolved from, take us back to how long we've been eating meat.
We have been eating meat. There's archaeological evidence for butchering of animals at 3.4 million years ago. So the animals that were being butchered at that time were not hunted by our ancestors. They were actually taken down by a predator. We didn't have any hunting technology at that time, but we had stone tool technology that allowed us to, carve these animals up and take the meat off. And when a predator takes an animal down on the African savanna, whether it's now or whether it was millions of years ago, and we know what these behavior patterns were like, they take down a large animal, dive inside, rip them apart with their canines, and eat the blood, the fat, and the organs, gorge themselves, and go off and sleep. And typically, they're leaving these massive animals carcasses covered in flesh. And these other animals, like the ancestors to modern-day buzzards, modern-day hyenas, would go in and they're biologically equipped, like they have the right equipment on their bodies to scavenge the meat. But our ancestors didn't until they created stone tools that allowed them to overcome their physical limitations and carve these animals up with these stone tools. So we have the bones of animals that were butchered, scavenged animals that were butchered by our ancestors at 3.4 million years ago. To date, the earliest stone tool we found is 100,000 years later, so it's 3.3 million years. But we just, we're doing the best we can with what we have. So somewhere around 3.5 million years ago, we started introducing meat into our diet. And somewhere, and this is the important part, somewhere around 2 million years ago, we started to hunt. We became the predators, and then we had the opportunity to eat any part of that animal we wanted, and we relished the blood, the fat, and the organs, as well as the meat.
So again, everyone, listen, we're on Facebook, we're on YouTube Live. Go ahead and ask questions. Put them in there and put them in the comment box. Feel free. I'm talking with Dr. Bill Schindler. If you've got nutrition questions, you need to ask them right now to Dr. Bill. His book is called Eat Like a Human. And I interviewed Dr. Bill a few years ago, and this is before the book. And now now we got the book out. And it's first of all, let me say, listen, it's a fantastic book. It is full of stories. It is funny. It is great experiences. Some of the ones again, about your TV show, experience and diving into the cold water. Great visual for anyone who's interested in reading about Dr. Bill diving and into the cold water and some of these survival shows. I love the modern survival shows because it shows how people, truly did it. And then also, too, to tout the book, 75 delicious recipes to allow you to eat like a human. We'll dive into that. So again, go into the comment section and let us know. Bill, let me ask you, we throw out these numbers, 3 million years, 3.5 million years. How do we date those? What's the technology that we use to tell us that's the time frame?
It depends on what you're trying to date and how long ago it was. Anything up to about 40,000 years ago, we can use techniques like carbon-14 dating, and things that are a little bit more recent, we can use things like tree ring dating, which we can actually get to the actual year of the event we're trying to date. But when we go back in time that far, we have to rely upon some other techniques like potassium argon dating, or what we're actually doing essentially is, if we find a tool, we can't, a tool itself, and I don't want to dive into the, I'm happy to expand it as much as needed, but very quickly, anything that's organic and fits within that less than 40,000 year time frame, we can use carbon-14 dating with. But things that weren't alive, like a stone tool, we can't use those methods. But what we can do is we understand how different processes in the earth happen, like volcanic eruptions and how soils form and those sorts of things. So if we're very careful when we're excavating and we find, this is obviously a simplified version of it, but if we find a tool, we can often date the layer above it and the layer below it because of a particular, say, volcanic event that happened, which resets some things that we can date. And we know that that event of the use and deposition of that tool happened between those two time periods. So, and we're talking about things like 3.5 million years ago. If we're off by 1,000 years, it's not a very big deal, right? For the kinds of conversations that we want to have.
So, so humans have been eating animal products, for all those years. Presumably seafood would be around that time as well. We may be even able to safely assume it may have been going on for eons before that as well. It's just, we know that, at least from, that, 3.4, 3.5 million years ago. So would you say that our bodies are fully equipped to be this, eating these animal foods, right?
Well, it is really, really complicated. It's one of the things I dive deep into in the book. We are omnivores. Humans are omnivores. We know this. I don't think there's anybody that is, not at least many people that are questioning that, but we're not omnivores by design. We didn't appear and have this digestive tract and teeth and everything designed to eat all the foods in front of us and all the foods that we eat. But what we were equipped with and what we are equipped with now is this brain, this incredibly powerful organ that allows us to overcome our biological limitations. We have an incredibly inefficient digestive tract compared to other animals, especially for certain kinds of foods. But we don't need it, right? Because what we've been doing for 3.5 million years is creating technologies that allow us to extract, just like scavenging on the savannah with stone tools, allow us to extract more resources from our environment that we don't necessarily have the biological, makeup to do, and transform that food into the most nourishing and safest form possible before we put it into our bodies. And when you look at it like that, well, you know what? We're not omnivores by design. We're omnivores by technology, and we can't escape that fact. Now, with animals, here's a very interesting thing. If you look at most of the technologies of the past several million years involved with getting and processing food, when it comes to animals, most of those technologies we developed were about hunting or trapping or fishing, overcoming our limitations to actually get the thing itself, right? Because we can't run that fast and we can't, fly through the air and we don't have huge canines. but we can make bows and arrows and atlatls and boomerangs and throwing sticks and traps and things. So most of our brain power for millions of years, as far as animals were concerned, was actually getting the animal. With plants, it's a completely different thing. Plants have all sorts of toxins and issues, and even though plants have nutrition in them, most of that nutrition is locked up and requires us to do all sorts of things like fermentation or nixtamalization to access those nutrients. So most of our brain power concerning plants up until the agricultural revolution went into making plants safe and making the nutrients in those plants available to our inefficient digestive tracts. So here's the really cool thing. You take down an animal, and all you have to do is have a sharp edge to open that up, and almost the entirety of that nutrition is not only safe but and nutrient dense, but incredibly bioavailable, even for our digestive tracts. All we got to do is just literally start eating.
So, to that end, though, I mean, so let's take it to fire. So when does fire come into the picture? Is fire and heating, is that good for food, bad for food? What are the changes? Obviously, we could say most people today, when they are consuming animal products, they are in the cooked state. So tell me about fire, and then how does that impact the food?
Fire, there's a huge debate. Me and several other, a whole bunch of other anthropologists believe fire began as early as 2 million years ago. That's what control of fire. And what's very interesting is that the time that we start hunting and the time that we begin to control fire are very similar, at a very similar time. And it's at that moment that our ancestors jumped in brain and body size the most we ever have, right? So there's something going on then that is incredibly important. Fire is important for our ancestors for a lot of reasons. It's important for warmth. It is important for safety. It is, and when we can talk about it later, but even though we were bipedal and walking on two legs since 5 to 7 million years ago, we think our ancestors still lived in trees at night, slept in trees until we developed technology of fire, which is when we could actually protect ourselves from all the nasty things that are out there. So it's for safety, it's for extending our day, all these things fire is great for, but also for processing food. Fire can be used in a way that, makes food inedible and makes food unsafe in certain ways, using it the wrong way. But in many cases, it actually improves the safety and improves our ability to access the nutrition in it. There's a fantastic paleoanthropologist from Harvard who has done a lot of work with meat, red meat, and the human digestive tract and how we consume it the best and most efficient ways. And he actually does a lot of work with chimpanzees as well. And what he's found is that raw red meat, like if I just gave you a hunk of raw red meat and you ate it, well, you would get a bunch of nutrition out of it. But our bodies would work a little bit less hard and get a little bit more nutrition out of it if we, physically broke it down in some way. So we either sliced it or ground it or cut it up or something. And then 2B, we did a little bit of cooking. We didn't overcook it, but a little bit of cooking. So in reality, the best way, in my mind, to access the most amount of nutrients from, say, a huge hunk of beef is a medium rare hamburger. But because you get both of that, you get that physical processing already, that chemical changes that happen when you do a little bit of heating. You don't overcook it, and that's great. The organs, the blood, the fat, the offal, the most nutrient dense bioavailable part of it, are ready to go. I mean, as far as nutrition is concerned, you can get incredible amount of nutrition just by eating it raw. Cooking it, in some cases, actually, depending on what you're cooking and how you're cooking it, can reduce some of the nutrients and the availability of them slightly. But the reality is most people like these things cooked a little bit. So I'd rather have some sort of cooked liver going into somebody than no liver at all.
Yeah. And, again, I think that most of the people on this, that are listening to us that are part of Natural Heart Doctor, our tribe, they're familiar with my work and my book, the Paleocardiologist. And, so certainly they're going to be coming at it from, yes, I like to eat, meat and seafood. I understand the importance of all those as well. But I think, again, really trying to get people to gravitate towards the offal, the liver, the kidney, the heart, that nose to tail eating. But if you look at some of the kind of the carnivore authorities, they really, a lot of them have really swung in that really, almost, close to 100% animal products. And I love about your book is that, again, it's like eat like a human, like humans have been eating for tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years. And I think what's great about your book too is that it just opens up so many food categories, but does so in a safe way. And again, providing the recipes, with it is fantastic. But maybe kind of talk us through that as far as, let's dive into the plants and how you talk about how when plants are prepared, because you mentioned before, the plants don't exist to make us healthy. They're there for their benefit. They are producing their kind of bio warfare against predators like us. And then over the years, right, how our ancestors came up with these technologies and processes to make them healthy for us and beneficial for us to consume.
Yep. So a couple things I think everyone needs to recognize, and I know we know this innately, but sometimes we may forget. The foods that we have access to today are different than the plants we're eating, the animals we're eating are different than the plants and the animals we were eating in the past for most of us, right? Because up until very, very recent times, from the time scale we're talking about, all of the plants and all of the animals were wild. So what we have access to now in the grocery store have been genetically modified, some of it more recently, but also for thousands of years through selection, have been genetically modified. And through that, we've lost, other people growing our food, we've lost a connection and understanding to a lot of the things about that food. So any forager will tell you, and anybody listening that's a forager will know, there are real dangers out there in the plant world. And not only do you have to identify the plants properly and harvest them at the right times, but even if you do those things right, there's a lot of post-processing that has to happen after you get those plants to make them safe and unlock those nutrients. Now, when we started farming 12 to 15,000 years ago, we've taken a lot of those plants and through selective pressure lessened some of the toxic load in those plants. We never erased it. We've never erased it all in the plant. So every single vegetable somewhere, every single plant has toxins in it. Some of those toxins are kind of benign and don't bother us. Some of them will kill us outright, but a large host of them will cause problems if we eat too many of them, or, they can build up in our bodies over time. And I think one of the real dangers is that many of us are so disconnected to our food and other people are preparing things and dealing with safety that we just walk into the grocery store with this mindset, all of this is safe for me, especially in the produce section. If some of it's good, more of it's better, I'm just going to turn my brain off and, all the senses that I typically would have used to try to decide what I should eat. And I just load my cart. And that's really, really, really problematic. So what we found is that so many of these plants require some sort of approach to make them as safe and nourishing as possible. Quite often, it's something as simple as fermentation, which is incredibly easy for everyone to do on their kitchen counters with a mason jar and a little bit of salt and a little bit of water. And we go through that extensively in the book. Fermentation is a thread throughout the entire thing. But other things like seasonality, eating seasonally, can help rectify a lot of issues. Spinach is one of the most dangerous plants in my mind in the produce section, especially because of oxalates. Spinach itself isn't necessarily something that will cause a lot of issues if you ate the spinach when it grew in your area that time of year for that 2-week window. But now we've touted it as a superfood and we can ship it all over the world, and we have it in the frozen food section. And there are people that are literally eating spinach every single day. And now that act is causing problems, not necessarily the spinach itself. So very simple things like understanding, things like seasonality and a little bit of fermentation and selecting plants with, say, a lower oxalate load or whatever can make a humongous difference.
What do you think about the concept? Again, most of us, live in the Northern Hemisphere. Mm-hmm. Not many people live along the equator, certainly in developed countries. So I tend to tell people that the winter time is more of a time for the nutrient-dense animal products, for seafood, and certainly it's not a time to import oranges from South America or plums, from around the world. that, again, like the winter time is that time of meat and seafood. And then, as summer rolls in, and intuitively things will be much more natural, fruits and vegetables to be eating in the summertime, based on that, your location. Do you think that is, obviously a good basic foundation? I know other people talk about different cycles. Again, some people go into ketosis, in and out of ketosis. They'll go, higher carb for a week, and then maybe low carb for a week, and do that. And I think my way may be a little bit better of an approach.
Yeah, I think it's a fantastic approach. Exactly. So if you go to the farmer's market, or you belong to a CSA, community supported agriculture, this happens by default, right? Because those things that are available are the things that are available at that time. And one thing you'll notice is the vegetable selections change and the fruit selections change, but the animals are always there. Eating seasonally, animals are there all the time to eat. Now, their fat content will fluctuate sometimes, especially in northern and southern climates, but the animals are always there. And I do believe when we had the ability to harvest animals at will, they were the mainstay of our diet throughout the entire year. And then as the plants come in and out, that you can very easily see what's happening. And quite often, and there's a Kean Foley, great guy. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he's Irish. He wrote a book called Don't Eat for Winter. He actually eats. Well, he found himself in his late 30s and his 40s, incredibly overweight. I'll give you the quick story because I think it's directly related to this. He lives in Southern Ireland, and he was looking out of his window, and he was eating an apple in December. And he looked out; he had an apple tree in his yard, and he looked out and noticed that not only didn't that apple tree have any apples on it, but it actually had absolutely no leaves on it. And he said, well, all I'm going to do is change, and I'm going to eat incredibly, perfectly, as hyper seasonally as possible. And he has now won several international bodybuilding championships and is an international kettlebell champion. And the only thing he changed about his diet was eating what was in season when it was in season. And what he noticed is that, eating for winter, most animals eating for winter, the plants that are available are high carbohydrate plants, fruits, underground storage organs, roots, corms, tubers, potato-like things. And then you don't see that stuff in other parts of the year. And his weight fluctuates throughout the entire year as the foods that come in and out of his diet, and his body fat content fluctuates as it comes in. And I do think there's something to that for sure. And your approach is spot on. I love it.
The Healthy Heart Show will be right back after we take this quick break to hear from our sponsor. Would you like to drink great tasting coffee that's also good for your heart health? Cardiology Coffee is your answer. This 5-star rated coffee is delicious. It's a gourmet coffee that begins with whole organic beans, hand-selected and carefully roasted. It's tested and certified to be free of pesticides, mold, and other toxins. Cardiology Coffee is great for your heart, and you're going to love how it tastes. Order now online at cardiologycoffee.com. Now back to the Healthy Heart Show.
Once again, we're talking with Dr. Bill Schindler, PhD, wrote his book, Eat Like a Human. And again, it's just a fantastic, fantastic read. And I think, once again, it just kind of really, really brings in that whole spectrum of what I think of, vegan, vegetarian, paleo, and then dipping into some of the carnivore, aspects. But I think, once again, you're just kind of showing what people from all around the world, not just because you sat behind a desk and read textbooks, you traveled to all these locations. You've got crazy stories, bringing your family, this whole story of the blood and milk mixture, I think is absolutely fantastic, including, I believe, like your youngest. Either was your youngest or your oldest kind of tapped out. Maybe it was your
youngest.
And like, sorry, Dad, I know I traveled across the world with you, but I'm not drinking that. So, again, I think there's so many great stories in the book. It makes it very readable, yet obviously the references are there, and obviously your credentials speak for themselves with amazing recipes. What about, I love your take on dairy because, me as a paleo guy with the understanding that if we tried to milk an auroch or a precursor to a cow, if you go up to an animal that has milk, that means it's nursing its young and it will kill you. But So it's not really paleo food, but you make the case again that we've been consuming dairy. Obviously, we consume our mother's milk,
Right.
but then even dairy and hunted animals that we're able to enjoy some of that in limited amounts. But again, fast forwarding, because so many people love dairy, and I think there's a lot of positive attributes. You talk about raw milk in the book, and that's what we're fully supporters of. So if you would break down, about dairy and how you discuss it in the book.
Yeah, well, the quick version is this. I do believe we are not designed to eat almost every single food that we consume. And that includes animals. Right? We're not designed to do it. We create technologies, whether it's a bow, whether it's a stone tool, to help us overcome that. Now, all the time when people are trying to figure out what they should be eating, they say, oh, should we be eating this? Are we designed to eat this? And those conversations, I think, are dead-end conversations. There's not a real answer to it, because the real answer is no, we're not. But we have figured out ways to overcome our limitations and make foods as safe and nourishing as possible. We can talk about it with grains. We can talk about it with animals. We can talk about it with dairy. Now, dairy, I will say, I do believe that is the one food that humans are perfectly designed to consume at a short time in our life when we're infants, just like every other mammal. But just like other mammals, when we get weaned off of our mother's milk, we suppress or lose a lot of our ability to safely and efficiently fully digest that milk, right? And in fact, when we really think about it, there's a lot of lactose intolerance around the world. Many of us think, well, those of us who aren't lactose intolerant think, hey, they're kind of weird. Maybe those people are lactose intolerant. The reality is it's actually flipped on its head. The people that are lactose tolerant, the people that can actually tolerate the lactose as adults, are weird. We're the new ones. 60% of humans on the planet right now are lactose intolerant. The people that are lactose tolerant are part of somewhere in their ancestry, a genetic mutation that allowed them to continue to produce that enzyme lactase into adulthood. All other animals, same thing. When they get weaned off of their mother's milk, they start to lose the ability to produce the enzymes needed to safely and efficiently digest that milk. Now, if I just stop there, you'd say, oh, well, then humans shouldn't be drinking milk. Well, humans shouldn't be eating most of the foods that we can because we aren't equipped. What I believe is that, and often we're mimicking, when we process food, we're mimicking what other animals naturally do who are designed to eat those foods, right? That's what we do, whether we're producing a sharp edge like a canine on a predator, or whether we're fermenting grains like a granivorous bird does inside of their stomachs, or whether we're fermenting tough vegetable materials like a cow or ruminant animal does in their rumen. We do these things before they go into our mouths. The cool thing about dairy is that we don't have to turn to another animal for advice. We just turn to our own species as infants. If we replicate the process that our bodies were doing inside when we were consuming dairy, when we were designed to do it when we were infants, then I do believe many of us can safely and efficiently consume milk and make it part of a healthy diet. And the reality and the short answer is, although I dive deep into the book here, is raw fermented dairy is replicating what's going on in our bodies when we're young.
Love it. And we actually, the Wolfsons, we live in Colorado, and we have a small sustainable farm that's near us. So we will enjoy raw dairy. They do sell raw kefir over there. They sell raw butter. And they also have other, grass-fed animal products that, again, we'll consume. And just in reading your book, too, it kind of gave me that enthusiasm to get a hold of a good starter culture to be able to ferment that milk into the kefir. So I'm excited to try that. Yes, they do it over there, but I think that really is kind of where you're going, really what your passion is about bringing us back into our food system, bringing us back into our food supply, teaching your children what it means to secure and procure and process food in such a way that, again, so many people have lost touch with. Before I ask you another question, I'll tell you, we actually had some friends in from out of town a couple years ago, and we took them to this farm, and the kids went out and they collected the eggs. And the mother, who was originally from Hong Kong, she looked at us and she said, wow, how fun. Who hides the eggs?
Are you kidding me?
And I'm a city slicker Chicago guy, the son of a cardiologist, and I'm not going to pretend that I grew up with any great knowledge by any means. But it was just, it's really kind of like that little microcosm right there of where so many people are at right now, where they don't even know what that it's a chicken that is up in the roost, that is laying the eggs, and how people are so far from that.
And here's what's really important. I wanted to make a fun, enjoyable, informative, but mostly empowering book. And it's one thing to talk about food and then walk away and have this newer understanding, but it's quite another thing to have that and then be able to turn around and actually execute it in your own kitchen. And that's exactly what I tried to do here. And what I think is very interesting for us to think about and empowering is that all of the major food processing technologies, the ones that literally allowed our ancestors to unlock nutrients from their environment in a way that built us as a species, biologically and culturally, are incredibly simple, powerful, but simple. I mean, they were doing these things in caves with sticks and stone tools and rocks and clay pots. Everybody listening has a kitchen that is better equipped than our ancestors had in their cave. So, in fact, if there's a food that you can't make in your house, I don't mean because of knowledge, I mean because of equipment and space and that. If there's a food that you can't make in your kitchen, then I think you should question whether or not it's something you should be eating, right? So these recipes are taking all the lessons from the book and making them really approachable. And for me, in my mind, the best way to inform yourself is to try to cook your food from scratch. And not that you have to cook all your food from scratch, but the food that you eat every day, or you feed your family every day or every week, should be the foods that you're focusing on, that you should understand as much as possible. Because even if you don't make them every week, understanding how they're made allows you to not only purchase the food from the right people, but to also support those people who are actually doing it right. So that's where the recipes come from. And real quick, I just want to put a quick plug in for this. I had a bunch of people, I had wonderful responses to the book, and a bunch of people saying, listen, this is great, but I'm still a little nervous to ferment dairy. I'm still a little nervous to do some lacto fermented vegetables. I'm still a little nervous to do a little butchering. Can you help? And some of these people, we do a lot of courses here at the Modern Stone Age Kitchen in person, but they were asking if we could do something virtual. So if anybody's listening and wants to take a deep dive into this book, February 1st, we are launching a 10-week intensive virtual program where we go week by week through every chapter. There's behind the scenes stories. One thing I was mentioned earlier was I'm around the world to do this research. My family and we met some incredible people. We're going to bring a bunch of those people on for some live chats and some conversations and questions and answers. And every single one of these classes, once a week, we will cook a bunch of recipes from the book. So it's an incredibly empowering way to take that next step. If you're a little bit nervous about really trying some of these things, then that's a great way to do it.
Well, that sounds like a phenomenal opportunity, and we'll certainly we'll let all of our listeners and readers know about that opportunity. Again, a 10-week deep dive with Dr. Bill Schindler, his family, and the team. How exciting! Tell me about that, because this is a chapter in the book. It's called Bugs. Protein, not pests. And I always tell people that all animals on planet Earth, right? They either eat other animals and or insects. It is only the vegan that does neither. So even if you're talking about a giraffe on the African tundra is consuming a lot of insects, just with the plant-based materials that they're eating. But again, just out there, and even primates, of course, are insects. So maybe give us a little insight as to, in your 10-week program, tell us about the insect week.
There will be an insect week. And let me say something very quick. You bring up a great point about vegans and insects. It's not just the giraffes eating the leaves on the African savanna that are getting insects into their diet that may not be realizing it. If anybody wants to do something really fun, start Googling the USDA allowances for insects in our food, and how many insect parts are allowed in a bottle of ketchup, and how many insect parts are allowed in this. There are tons of insects in our food, in vegan food, that we don't realize. So I've actually heard people suggest that one of the things that's helping keep vegans alive is the fact that they're eating a whole bunch of insects and they don't realize it. But regardless, insects have been in our diets way longer than just about anything else that's been in our diets. We're confident of this. In fact, before we were scavenging on the African savanna, Probably the most nutrient-dense, bioavailable food in our ancestors' diet were insects. And they continue to be a major part of the human diet in different parts of the world. So in the book, we go to Thailand and do a bunch of work in different places in Thailand. But that, there could be stories all over the place, obviously, about insects. Insects are incredibly important, and insects are I hate to say it, they're incredibly fun to cook with. They're nutritious, they're nutrient dense, they're safe. Except the quick caveat is if you have a shellfish allergy, you probably shouldn't be eating insects. Typically, there's some sort of crossover there as well, but they're also incredibly sustainable. The amount of food, when you look at the numbers for the amount of feed for the insects compared to the output, it's mind blowing. Same with water, and the same with how much waste comes out. So it's a winner. It's a win-win all the way around. So nutritionally, ethically, sustainably, and even, believe it or not, taste-wise, I know we have this ick factor when we think about insects, but they have unique textures, unique flavors, sometimes unique aromas that you can celebrate if you cook them right. So we're gonna focus on crickets when we get to the insect chapter for a couple of reasons. One, they're very easy to deal with, and two, there are some awesome farms all over the world, including here in the U.S., that are growing organically growing crickets for human consumption. So they're very easy to access as well.
Well, I think that's, certainly something that I haven't really looked much into it, although one of my lead health coaches whose birthday is today, Carrington Beecham, if you're listening, happy birthday, Carrington, which she talks about using cricket flowers as well. And I think it was a few years ago that I looked into it, but it's like, right, how do you find that clean source of, crickets from a cricket farm?
Yeah, and listen, when I started eating cricket, believe it, this is going to sound very strange. I started eating insects about a little over 20 years ago, and then it was difficult to find. And we were I know this is going to sound, we were going to bait shops. We were going to pet stores where they for lizards and things and mealworms and crickets and whatnot. And now there are some wonderful farms. The one I often use, there's more than numerous, but I use Intomo Farms out of Ontario. They organically grow crickets and mealworms and produce mealworm and cricket flour as well. It's fantastic. And it's a great, easy way to introduce incredible protein and fat, depending on the insect that you're using, into your diet without, a whole lot of work. Like you could throw that cricket flour into all sorts of things very, very easily. Or then you can celebrate. We'll talk about different ways of cooking insects in general. Or you can celebrate the actual thing itself and include insects whole in your food.
Are there any foods? I mean, obviously, in your book, Eat Like a Human, you just break down essentially how all cultures around the world processed various foods to make them digestible, nutritious, beneficial to the human. And you talk about whether it's corn, you talk about grain and turning that into sourdough, you talk about dairy, you talk about fermenting vegetables. But are there any foods that would you say are definitively off the human palate?
That's a great question. Yeah, refined sugar should be off our palate. But you mean raw materials? There are a few.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, right. I mean, artificial, things, refined sugars, processed foods. But is there anything else? I mean, whether it's, is it potatoes? Are there vegetables that, like, listen, under no circumstance does this become palatable? Beans, maybe talk about beans and how difficult they can be.
Yeah, beans are incredibly dangerous. Nuts, seeds, grains, legumes, they're all the same thing for a plant, right? That's where they're going to reproduce. And that's where a lot of thought and a lot of energy goes into. And that's the mechanism right there that allows that particular species to survive, right? The thing we need to do to not become extinct, every species needs to reproduce viable offspring. That offspring needs to stay safe and viable until they reproduce viable offspring. And that, if that continues, then your species survives. If that fails at any one of those places, you end up going extinct. So that's their offspring, right? The grains, the nuts, the seeds, the legumes, that's their offspring. So we mentioned earlier, plants are toxic, and you can imagine the parts of the plant that need to protect themselves more than anything are probably going to be the most toxic, and they are, and that's exactly the case. And that's why we have so much trouble safely digesting grains or beans or believe it or not, even nuts. So again, we could sit back and say, hey, I just don't want them in my diet, which is fine. But there is some nutrition we can get from them. There is a lot of pleasure we can get from them if we enjoy eating these foods. So then where are we left? We're left with the same sort of argument or discussion that we had with the dairy or with the other foods in our diet. What can we do to these foods to make them as safe and nourishing as possible? Now, physically, if you look at the shape of most seeds and nuts, they are literally designed to withstand the digestive tract of the animal that's eating them, whether it's human or another animal. I mean, they're designed like a bullet to go right through you. Chemically, they're designed to do the same thing. And seeds, they have so many chemical defenses, especially on the outside, to keep them dormant and safe until they're in the right environment to let down their defenses and then sprout, that they're incredibly dangerous to eat raw. So you mentioned beans. Raw red kidney beans, a couple, literally 3 or 4 raw red kidney beans will land you in the hospital if you eat them. That's how dangerous they are. Beans in general require not only soaking, but also cooking in order to detoxify them to the point where they're even close to being safe for human consumption. A quick aside, one thing that is really problematic today is with the so many pressure cookers that are getting pushed out right now, like the Instapot and all the other ones, which they're great. They're great for many things. They're great for making bone broth. They're great for making yogurt because you can time them and do all these things. But as far as beans are concerned, there's a huge danger here because many of them tout that you can skip the overnight soaking process for the beans, and you can pressure cook a bean from a raw dry bean into a finished bean that you can eat, in one go. And even if it makes it soft enough for you to eat, that doesn't mean it's safe enough for you to eat. Do not skip the overnight soak if you're cooking beans from scratch. I don't care how expensive and amazing that your pressure cooker is. But so beans are incredibly dangerous, especially kidney beans. Other ones like white navy beans are a little bit better. I will say, to more directly answer your question, though, the one thing in almost every case that I've found some sort of a toxin or a problem with plants, somebody or some groups around the world have figured out how to overcome that issue, right? Whether it's through soaking or fermentation or sprouting or nixtamalism or a whole host of things or a combination of many of these. The one thing that I haven't found a good anecdote for are the oxalates. Fermentation shows some promise. Cooking with dairy helps a little bit. Cooking in depending on the food, several changes of water and throwing the water out are helpful. But to really mitigate the dangers of oxalates I haven't found a good solution for yet. I'm still looking at promise because I have a huge oxalate problem. That's one of the reasons I bring it up. I brought it up several times. So all completely off the table, I don't know. But I will say the high oxalate plants are ones that I would limit in my diet, especially if I had an oxalate problem.
Yeah, for sure. And another thing you talk about in the book, and by the way, we're talking with Dr. Bill Schindler, his latest book, Eat Like a Human. We're also going to be sending out links that have to do with his 10-week program where he's going to be taking you through his book. And again, the recipes in there, I love the simplicity because again, I think that, historically, right? You're just pulling these recipes from tribal, societies. And really, again, these were just basic ways to process your food into an edible form that allows us to extract all the nutrients no matter where we lived on the globe. But you also touch on that. Let me say this for an example. For many years as a single male living in Chicago, if I didn't go out to a restaurant or a bar, I would typically have a meal and I would be over my sink or a garbage can. It wasn't a very spiritual thing. Yet in religious societies, they really make the meal really that celebration and the celebration of family and respect for the food.
Yeah.
So break that down a little bit. How do we kind of bring that back? And maybe even for the single guy who's listening in Chicago ago that he's watching this right now and he is eating over the sink. How do we bring that spirituality back to our lives?
God, I'm so glad you brought this up. You make such a great point. There's so much of my life that all I was focused on was trying to find out how to biologically feed myself and my family to meet our biological needs, right? And what I was missing was this whole other component, which for humans is so incredibly important. Humans are the only species on the planet that share food. Now, other animals eat at the same time as one another. And if you have 3 dogs and you put all the food down in front of them, you can see them all eating at the same time. But other than maybe a parent-child relationship, like a bird feeding the baby bird sort of thing, other animals don't share food. We do. Humans, in fact, not only do we share food, we celebrate sharing food. We go to great lengths and spend a lot of money to share food and make reservations and travel around the world to go and share food with one another. Right. And just think about how crazy it really is, that act. If you take a bunch of hungry animals and seat them around one another and put food in the middle of the table. Right. Number one, eye-to-eye contact is a sign of aggression. Showing your teeth in the animal world is a sign of aggression. And if you're hungry and there's a plate of food in the middle, I mean, it's an all-out melee. But humans celebrate that. In fact, and I truly believe now and understand, in order to be fully nourished as a human, we have to meet or exceed our biological needs and also our cultural and emotional needs. And again, things like sharing food, how fast we're eating, what the setting is like, all of those things are incredibly important to our health. I mean, and some people will go to great lengths to try to seek that out. And I believe it's in Korea, they have something called mukbang. Have you heard of mukbang? Certainly there's a lot of, late teens, early 20s, people, working these high stress, fast-paced jobs, living single, and they want to eat with somebody. So there's these mukbang stars. It's like MUKBING, that you can sign on and virtually eat with somebody at the same time. I mean, that's how strong that human drive is, and that need to be eating with somebody at the same time. So I hear you. I mean, there's so many periods in my life where my lunch consisted of trying to actually drive and eat at the same time. And for some people, their breakfast and their lunch, is that. And it's hard to put your finger, we can't necessarily measure it like we can measure calories or vitamins or minerals in our food, what the return is for slowing down, making a plate of food that actually looks appealing, eating slowly, eating with somebody that we love or with somebody that we respect, having a conversation. We can't put our fingers and measure that very easily, but I can promise you that is part of the human eating experience, and it's incredibly important to being fully nourished.
And thank you so much again. It's and certainly the slow active eating is all a parasympathetic part of our body. The autonomic nervous system divided into sympathetic, parasympathetic. Sympathetic is fight or flight when you're getting chased by the tiger. Parasympathetic is when you're resting and digesting. And you're right, if you're on the go, if you're not taking that time to really slow it down, of course, that's why so many people have digestive issues, and whether it's heartburn and diarrhea and constipation and all these different things. So this is all super fantastic stuff. Let me ask you one more thing too, and I'm not sure again if I encountered this in the book or not. Tell me about water. Where does water? You've traveled all around the world, and you get a lot of authorities maybe recommending to drink half your body weight in ounces of water daily, but I really can't. I haven't really seen any kind of literature that tells us how much water to drink. So, do you have any insight into that question?
Well, I'll tell you this. Number one, I'm just going to report on. I'm certainly not the authority on this, so I won't speak out of turn. But I will tell you what I've seen. If that's helpful. And my family and I have been very fortunate. We've been able to travel the world and live and work with indigenous groups all over the place, from South America to Africa to Asia, all over. And there's a couple things that were consistent across the board. Timing of eating. I mean, there was always almost in these indigenous groups, almost some built-in mechanism that just resulted in looking like intermittent fasting with the way that they ate almost every single day, which was very interesting. Animal products were the focus of meals whenever they could be. And if they weren't, it was because of some sort of modern phenomenon, like where people were pushed to or the ability to access these things. But there wasn't a constant with water. And in fact, in many of the places I was, water was fairly difficult to access. Now, again, a lot of the people I've been were not living in the areas they were living for the past 40,000 years. They've been pushed to sort of marginal areas. So that could explain part of it. But a quick story here. I spent time with the Hadza in Tanzania, the oldest hunter-gatherer group in the world. Very little access to water. In fact, the liquids the majority of the liquid that they took in for the day came from these roots that these tubers they would dig. Actually, I believe they're corms officially. They would spend a lot of time pulling out these corms, which were very similar to, say, a jicama. And they would eat this and shred it and eat it. Very fibrous. You couldn't just dive into it, but they would get the liquid from one or two of those. And that's what they had for the majority of the day. So again, I don't know. I don't want to even speak to what our biological requirements are, but I can tell you that I have spent a lot of time with incredibly healthy people that were drinking a lot less water than half their body weight in water on a given day.
Yeah, thank you for that. And that's exactly what I was looking for, is that I don't think that there's good science behind it necessarily. And everybody says always drink lots of water. I would say probably drink when you're thirsty, number one. But again, just, from your experiences in the real world of what you saw, that's, of course, says it all from there. Everyone listen, it's been a fantastic interview with Dr. Bill Schindler. Eat Like a Human is the book. Dr. Bill, I know obviously, like everything, this is available on Amazon. Mm-hmm. Is there another location people can go to get this book that would be different? Or maybe tell us a little bit more about how we can find out about you.
Yeah, sure. So that book is on the bookshelves in Barnes & Nobles all throughout the country. I believe Target may have it now too. We just found out, but I'm not positive about that. You can get them. A lot of independent bookstores have it. Any major online resource has it as well. And if you want an autographed copy, it's the same price. You can contact us. We have two different. There's a question here about Audible. Yes, it's on Audible as well. And you can. Our website is eatlikeahuman.com. And also modernstoneagekitchen.com. And in both of those places, you can find out information for how to get an autographed copy of the book, and also the course we were talking about earlier, and any of our other resources, our online resources, other classes we produce. The cool thing, very quickly, my wife and I and whole family have just started the Modern Stone Age Kitchen. We launched it in June. It is we call it a foodery and storefront where we're actually making almost all of the recipes from that book come alive to feed the community. And you can find out information about that online as well. And on social media, I'm at Dr. Bill Schindler, Dr. Bill Schindler. And you can also follow the Modern Stone Age Kitchen there as well.
Love it, love it, love it. Dr. Bill, absolute pleasure as always to connect with you. Congratulations on your book. Everybody go out and get a copy of Dr. Bill's book. It's funny, it's entertaining, and of course, it's credible. The man we're talking to is a PhD. He's got, archaeology, anthropology, paleontology, all the ologies, all that experience, real world experience getting out there with him and his family. So again, Dr. Bill, thank you so much for being on this episode with Natural Heart Doctor. And we'll make sure to include all the links and all the different ways to connect with you, Dr. Bill, and including your 10-week course coming up. So
awesome. Always a pleasure.
I'm Dr. Jack Wolfson. Cheers to your 100-year heart. And again, when you follow the information of people and experts like Dr. Bill Schindler, you're going to get that 100-year heart. So be well. We'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.
That does it for today's episode. Thanks so much for listening to The Healthy Heart Show. Please help us get the word out by liking and subscribing to our podcast and our Facebook page, Natural Heart Doctor. Please show support for our podcast sponsor, Cardiology Coffee, your resource for organic, antioxidant-rich, mold and pesticide-free coffee shipped straight to your door. Learn more by adding @Cardiology Coffee on Instagram and visiting cardiologycoffee.com. This podcast provides materials for information and educational purposes only and should not be considered medical advice. We encourage you to contact your physician for any of the health issues discussed here.